Hey friends, welcome back to The Wilderness Way. My name is Kristel Acevedo, and today we are joined by my friend and colleague at Wheaton College Litvin Divinity School, Simone Halpin. That's right, we are both in the trenches of our doctoral studies, and hopefully by the time this podcast episode releases, we will have turned in our doctoral project proposals, but if not, there's grace for that. I have loved getting to know Simone as we have gone through the program together. I love that Simone always shows up as her truest self. She is passionate and honest and so earnest in everything that she does. Plus, it's just cool to have another woman in the program with me. Shout out to the other ladies of our cohort, Savea, Rachel, and Mary. Let me tell you about Simone. Simone Halpin is the founder and visionary leader of Naomi's House. Naomi's House began in 2016 after years of preparing and researching the best way to serve survivors of commercial sexual exploitation. Naomi's House has since created a model that went from serving 5 women annually through residential services to hundreds of women annually in multiple programs across the Chicagoland area. Simone is a weekly contributor to the Next Level podcast produced by her church, Glen Ellen Bible Church. She met her husband Anthony while studying at Texas A&M University, and she is a 2008 graduate of Moody Theological Seminary, and she's a doctoral student at Wheaton College pursuing her Doctor of Ministry. Simone and Anthony live in Wheaton with their 4 amazing children. And I just want to give a gentle warning to my listeners that today we are going to be discussing the story of Hagar, and that Simone is going to candidly share about the work she does at Naomi's House, serving women who are survivors. So please keep this in mind if you have little ones around or if you need to care for yourself. If you want to know more about the incredible work of Naomi's House, you can head over to their website, naomishouse.org. Now here's my conversation with Simone. All right, friends, so I'm here with the wonderful Simone, and I'm just so grateful that you have decided to come on this podcast and share about the amazing work that you're doing with Naomi's House and what you have learned from Scripture. It's been really fun to get to know you over the past few years, and I know that you have a cold right now, and so I'm extra grateful that despite the cold, you are pushing through and recording today, and I just think you're an amazing person. So thank you so much for being on here.
Aw, Kristel, there's actually nothing I wouldn't do for you, so that's great.
Okay.
This is an easy yes.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to have you on because you founded an incredible organization called Naomi's House. And so I wanted you to first and foremost share about why you got into anti-trafficking work and to tell us about starting Naomi's House.
Yeah, of course. I'd be delighted to share. And anytime there's an opportunity to talk about Naomi's House and what God has done in and through this ministry, I just am so grateful. So thank you for just putting a spotlight on what we do and the women we serve. I learned about women who were being commercially exploited and trafficked in the Chicago area all the way back as early as 2010, 2011. And I was doing street outreach to women who were being forced into prostitution. And I had joined forces with another organization. I worked at a large church in the city of Chicago. And that my role at the church lent me the opportunity to do outreach. And I joined forces with this other organization who still to this day does street outreach every Friday night to women who are being forced into prostitution and sexual exploitation, and they're victims of human trafficking. And so that's how I first learned about it. I was just having dialogue and conversations with women at the wee hours of the morning. It would be like 1, 2, 3 a.m., which is just in and of itself part of the story of what it looks like for a woman who's being commercially exploited through street prostitution, which is one form of human trafficking. There's dozens of forms specifically to sexual exploitation. But my first intro into it was talking to women who were being prostituted on street corners. And it was just a very eye-opening experience. And the more I was engaged in conversation, praying with women, hearing their stories, the longer I was involved in outreach, the more my heart was just softened toward what women were experiencing. And there was one particular night, and Kristel, you might have heard this story from our time together in class, but it was when I had approached a woman with a gift bag, which is how we did outreach, or how we would engage in conversation. We would just walk up to a woman and say, "We have a small gift for you, and if you have any prayer needs, we're here to pray for you tonight." And the whole point of outreach was just to look a woman in the eye, give her some very tangible things that she might need in a gift bag, and offer prayer. And most of the time, women would say yes. They were receptive to some of these conversations, because I learned it was sometimes the most dignified conversation they would have for that entire day. And there was this one night where I approached a woman and I said what I just said to you. Do you have any prayer needs? I have this gift for you. And we were just about to engage in conversation when a car pulled up. And it was a man who pulled his car to the curb, and he rolled down his passenger window, and she looked at me, and she kind of looked at the car, and she leaned forward, and she was having this conversation, some sort of negotiation happening between the two of them. And I just stood there. This is probably the closest I had been to an actual conversation and a transaction between, in our field, we would say he was a buyer because he was purchasing sex from this woman who essentially is the product. And they talk. She turns back to me, and I'm just, staring, wondering what she's going to do. And she opens the car door, and she proceeds to put one foot in the car, and she has one foot on the curb. And when she turns back to me at that last moment, I just kind of didn't know what to do. I just kind of reached toward her. I didn't touch her, but I just said, "You don't have to do this." And she didn't say a single word to me. After I said that, she just looked me dead in the eye, and without having to say a word, she communicated to me, with her eyes and with just her countenance, "Yes, I do." And she got into the car, and they drove off, and I just stood there so paralyzed, heartbroken, wondering what is going to happen to her in these next 30 minutes. That's just violent and degrading. Where's her agency in this scenario? What say does she have in this matter? And then what can I do about it? How did she get into this life? How does she get out of this life? What happens to her while she's in this life? All these thoughts. And it was in that moment, that night, that I knew that there was some purpose that God had given me to do something for her. And through a series of many events, and several years later, the vision and the heart to build a ministry that provides aftercare for women who are able to ever leave a life of exploitation. We meaning a collective group of us, put this vision together, and eventually Naomi's house was birthed for a woman just like that, so that if she got to a point where she could leave and she could say no, and she would have a place to go. So I can unpack that any way you want, and why it's hard for women to leave, and why there's really very few places for women to go if they do leave. But that's how I first learned of it, was working with women on the streets.
Yeah. So Naomi's house specifically offers like aftercare, basically, once a woman is ready to leave that life.
That's right. So that's where we started. So that my first interaction with street outreach was in 2010. I think my encounter with this woman was in 2012. I remember this because I was pregnant with my third at the time. And we opened Naomi's house in 2016, just to give you a little bit of a time frame. And when we first opened in 2016, we launched our first program, which is residential living. So it's exactly what you just said. So it is long-term care for a woman who has suffered and survived sexual exploitation, sex trafficking, and she can live in our residential home for up to 2 years and receive literally all the resources she needs, both physically, mental health, spiritually, anything she needs to recover, and then launch back into the community after going through our program. And then since establishing Naomi's House in 2016, we have developed further programming. So now we started with residential living, but we also do day programming. And then we've developed our own outreach arm as well. So now we can work with women who are still in the life and are looking for resources. They're looking for vision of what life can look like outside of exploitation. And so now so it's like a three-pronged model that we've developed since 2016 that essentially can offer resources, offer hope to a woman no matter where she is on her healing journey.
Before we get to talking about Hagar, what do you wish people knew about the women that you serve?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, I'll say the obvious. Well, I think that's obvious. They are the strongest, most brave, incredible women that you could ever meet. There's a lot of underlying factors and vulnerabilities that women often face and are exposed to that has put them in a place to where they're groomed into sexual exploitation. So it's common for women to have suffered from some sort of childhood abuse, who eventually end up being exploited. There's a strong link there. There's a lot of other systematic failures that have happened to women who are exploited. And so they have already, by the time someone is in a program like Naomi's House, they have already endured so much. And they're looking for, they've kind of come to the end of themselves. And so they're just looking for someone to say, you matter and there is still hope for you. So for a woman to get to that point, knowing how much she's endured and how much she's suffered, the only thing she has left in her, we often find with the clients that we work with, is just this last bit of like, please, Lord, please tell me there's something different for me. And when you have that type of dependence on God, when you get to the point where you realize you have nothing but Him, if He's gracious enough to reach out and give her another chance, these women, the women we work with, are just filled with that strength, because they've suffered and endured so much. So that's one thing that it's important for people to know. Women who've been exploited are called survivors for a reason. It's like the definition of survivor. I think the other important thing for people to know about the women that we work with is, when women come into any one of our programs and are starting to build a case for themselves, a care plan is what we call it, they have a long list of needs. And prosecuting a trafficker is not usually top of the list. They're looking for resources to get health care. Their education at some point likely has been disrupted, so they want to finish, whether it's high school or college or a trade that they started. There's an incredible story of a woman that I met last fall who continued to come to get services for us because she wanted to be a better mom. She had two children. Her husband was her trafficker. Her husband was responsible for selling her, and her children were exposed to that. And all she wanted to do was get help for her kids. So I just see that innate nurturing piece in her. And she's a good mom before she even had the words to own that and to claim that. She was already a good mom, and we just helped her see that in herself. Women can't leave often their trafficking situation because of all of the coercive and manipulative tactics that traffickers use, whether it's a husband or a family member. Majority of the women we work with either are trafficked by someone they know, like a romantic partner, or a family member, even a parent. And so there's these real tricky relationships that happen between a woman and the person who's supposed to be either protecting them or providing for them, caring for them. And when that relationship is turned, and now that person is harming them, selling their bodies, abusing them, it really establishes some deep, complex trauma in her
Mm-hmm.
heart and her mind. So overcoming the obstacles of complex trauma is extremely difficult. And so it helps explain to people why women just can't leave, why the
Mm-hmm.
woman on the street corner that I met that night couldn't just walk with me to a safe place. It's complicated, and it's very layered. So I think it's important for people to know that if a woman could just walk away and leave, of course she would, but
Right.
she can't. There's a lot
Right.
of layers to it, and that's why.
Wow.
Mm,
Well, thank you for the work that you do and for
mm,
sharing it with us and educating us. And I think the reason I wanted you specifically to speak into this particular episode, this particular study, was because when I was reading the story about Hagar
mm,
for this project, I had so much tension like in my
mm-hmm,
body because
mm-hmm,
Hagar was part of Abraham's family, right?
mm-hmm,
And Abraham is like a father of the faith, and Abraham
mm-hmm,
is revered, and
mm-hmm,
he did, God did use Abraham, and God did give Abraham a
mm-hmm,
promise, but then we
mm-hmm,
see sin like
mm-hmm,
taking place, and we see this woman being victimized really
mm-hmm,
in all of this, and I think it is complicated, and I think there are layers, and so I'm glad that you have the experience to know that there are layers, and
mm-hmm.
that it's not just so straightforward, and I think you can help us unpack some of what's going on with Hagar. And so when you first read the story about Hagar, when people, maybe you're sharing about this with other people, what do you wish people knew about
Mm-hmm,
Hagar, like in the
mm-hmm,
same vein like what you wish people knew about the women you serve? What do you
mm-hmm.
wish people knew about Hagar?
Yeah, yeah. Um, I think we have to be very careful. And Christelle, I know that you're such a good Bible teacher, and so I would love for you to even help me
Mm-hmm.
describe this if I miss it. But I think it's really important for us to recognize how quick we put on a modern lens when we look at the
Mm-hmm.
story of Hagar and
Correct.
Abraham. Um, there's something about her, and I was just even rereading the story again this morning just a little bit to prepare for our time today, and I could even feel it in my own heart. There's something about her. You're like, is she a mistress? Is
Mm-hmm.
she feels like she's disrupting the marriage between Abraham and Sarah. And to your point, Abraham and Sarah have this um, such an important role in the kingdom, in
Mm-hmm.
the whole timeline of our biblical timeline. So we, I want to understand Hagar, but not at the expense of Abraham or Sarah, but also to your point, there is this tension. And so our modern lens, for me at least, when I first look at Hagar at first glance, I think, well, she's just kind of in the way. She's disrupting this marriage, and you have
Mm-hmm.
empathy for Sarah because she
Mm-hmm.
can't have a baby, and you want to know what God's going to do in their story because he promised him to be the father of many nations, and so you want God to show up, but but do you want him to show up in the way that Hagar gets pregnant, and that feels out of order, and that doesn't align with our traditional marriage values that
Mm-hmm.
we think of today. So the whole story just is like uncomfortable and messy. um so the first thing I do is I think we have to just remove our modern lens from
Yeah.
what we know, because the
Yep.
way families and cultures were structured at this time is just so different than it is for us today. God's heart has not changed, and
Right.
God's values has not changed, but we just have to be careful not to bring that modern lens. So there's things about her that I think sometimes at first glance we feel uncomfortable, for me at least, and that was one of them. That is, she's just she's just kind of in the way. I wish that God maybe at first glance would have let Sarah get pregnant and not even have to bring Hagar
Mm-hmm.
into the story.
Mm-hmm.
But because that's not what happens, there is so much we can learn about her, and learn to have empathy toward a woman who, it is clear as day, Christelle, unless I'm misinterpreting, has zero agency in this story. She has
Mm-hmm.
no say of what's happening, so much so that she runs from the situation. She's being mistreated, and she runs to the wilderness which is our favorite part of the story when God meets her there, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's something that we can glean from her, is that we can hopefully find a little bit of ourselves in her.
Mm-hmm.
That there's this characteristic of her that um, feels uncomfortable. She's being mistreated. She's very much misunderstood, it appears. And she runs from that. She doesn't want to be, a part of this abusive life. And I identify with that when I'm uncomfortable, or when if something's feeling, not right in my own life, I too just I want to isolate and bolt
Yep.
and get out of there. And for God to see that in her
Mm-hmm.
and to meet her. And so, the best part of the story is when he speaks to her and she names him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she identifies that he sees her. I think there's a part of all of us that, whether we have a similar story of abuse or just can relate to what it feels like to feel out of place,
Mm-hmm.
um, God will see us too. And so the big players in this story are Abraham and Sarah. Um, but what cannot be missed is that because God meets with her in the wilderness, and because makes it he makes himself visible to her in the way that he says, "You are the God who sees me,"
Mm-hmm.
um, it reminds us that there is no one that God won't pursue. No
Mm.
one. Um, she's everything about her feels um, kind of like the underdog. She's
Mm-hmm.
marginalized. She's a single mom, to use a word that we would use for today that wouldn't have been described of her at the time.
Right.
She had no agency. She had no worth. She didn't
Mm.
contribute. She had no way of making an income. There are all these things about her. I mean, she is literally at the bottom of the list on the hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
And God pursues her, sees her, converses with her. And it's not just once, but twice. He
Mm-hmm.
provides for her again.
Mm-hmm.
And this is all in chapter 16. And again, he goes to her again in, what is it, 21?
I
Yeah,
think so.
21.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's just for God to for there to be so much interaction between the God of Abraham
Right.
and then a woman who means very little to this society.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully what that does for us is it encourages us that God says there's nobody
Mm-hmm.
too far out of any
Yeah.
culture or any society that's unworthy. Every single person has value and contributes in the eyes of God.
Yeah. I love that you brought up the fact that we can't interpret this with modern eyes, right?
Mm,
That
mm,
we have
mhm,
to be able to understand that this happened in a specific culture at a specific
mhm,
time in a specific part of the world,
mhm.
and we have to bring that to the table when we read
Yeah.
this story because it is
Mhm,
weird, right? Like
mhm.
I understand that they, first of all, they were in a society where if you were barren, that
Yeah.
it was almost like you were cursed,
Mhm,
like, so
mhm,
Sarah, I can, like you said, empathize
mhm,
with her, that she is dealing with this feeling of unworthiness and this
mhm,
feeling of like, I have one job and I can't even
mhm.
do that,
Right,
and now
right.
God is mocking me because
Mhm,
he's saying that we're gonna have all these
mhm.
kids, and then and Abraham's gonna be the father of many nations, but I can't do that for him. So I'm sure that
Yeah,
she felt
yeah.
like desperate,
Yes.
and then so much so that she decided to take things into her own hands and be like,
Mhm,
all right, I got it.
mhm.
I got, because, women, we be thinking, right? We're problem solvers. She's
Uh-huh,
like, all right, I
mhm,
got it.
uh-huh.
I got this maid, I don't,
Mhm,
this woman that's part of our clan,
mhm,
and I'm going to give her to my husband and she's going to have the kids
mhm,
and it'll be great. And of course, we know that when we try to take things
mhm,
into our own hands, when we think that
mhm.
we have to help God,
Right.
the God of the
Mhm,
universe, that we have to
mhm,
help him,
mhm.
it turns into a mess.
Yeah.
And that's what I think I love about scripture,
Mhm,
is that the Bible is not all these stories about all these great figures, Abraham and
mhm,
David, and
mhm,
all of these people are flawed.
mhm,
And the
mhm.
Bible does not hide that.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's
so
right.
we see that God uses flawed
Mm-hmm.
people,
Mm-hmm.
because at the end of the day, God gets the glory.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about how good Abraham is or how good Sarah is or how
Mm-hmm.
good Hagar
Mm-hmm.
is even.
Right.
It's about God and how he
Yeah.
is able to do the impossible,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and how he is so personal to us. He's like so lofty, right? it's
Mm-hmm.
it's like he's so high up that he can do anything, but he's
Mm-hmm.
also so personal to us that he
Right.
will meet us in the middle of the desert
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
provide water, and
Mm-hmm.
then we can say, you are the God who sees
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
It's so powerful, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
I love that so much, and I'm trying to also remember with this story, kind of the story arc of Genesis, just
Mm-hmm.
in the like what God is doing consistently through this very first book we have, right, of the Bible. And the theme that I keep seeing over and over is that he is creating, um, there's so much disorder and darkness starting from, the very
Mm-hmm.
first chapter of Genesis. And over, God creates this beauty
Yeah.
and order and goodness. And he's trying to lay this out for his people, which, spoiler alert, happens all the way until Jesus.
Yeah.
And even in the midst of darkness and disorder and chaos, which is what is happening for Hagar, God still creates beauty for her, and he
Mm-hmm.
creates order for her. He gives her voice in this moment. Um, she ends up having a son, and
Mm-hmm.
so even in that gift to her, and you see that again later in what I say was 21,
Mm-hmm.
when she cries out to him again because she thinks he's dying, and
Mm-hmm.
you see um, this side to her of like what a good mom she is, because she doesn't want him to die. She's praying for water, and again God shows up and provides that for both of them. There's just so much to identify with her, and to your point, how it really spotlights God's sovereignty. And
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't and I'm really trying to wrestle through that tension that you talked about too, Kristel, in that um there's we don't have to love Hagar at the expense of Sarah.
Right.
We there's room for both, right? There's room to see in both of them the good and the bad, the hard and the frustration, and through the mixture of all these emotions and wanting to see the goodness for both of these women. What is prevailing, to your point,
Mm-hmm.
is God's sovereignty and God's
Mm-hmm.
provision.
Mm-hmm.
um, so it's just a story that transcends time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That it does make me think, if I could just say one thing, it does make me think a lot about the women that we work with at Naomi's house, because
Mm-hmm.
so much similarities in terms of abuse and sexual violence women have experienced when they come to our program. And there's this complex, almost spiral of shame that
Mm-hmm.
women feel, because there are times where they ask, is this my fault? Did I um, bring this upon myself? Um, is it my fault that I couldn't get out of this life?
Mm-hmm.
And they'll start to to grapple through, well, I have an addiction, and so the addiction is what is my fault, and so that's why I had to sell my body. Or I have children, and so I needed to provide for them, but because I was exploited for so long, I have no other way to make money, and so this is all
Mm-hmm.
I can do. Or I need, this man trafficker slash pimp slash romantic partner cares for me, and so as long as I'm doing what he asks me, things are going to work out. And so it's just this very complicated scenario of, did I do something wrong?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another piece to Hagar's story, is despite having no agency and questioning whether or not is it her fault, or should she have done something differently, or should she have returned when God says go back and submit to Sarah. I mean, what a hard thing to
Yeah.
hear.
Yeah.
um I think that what God does so beautifully in Hagar's story, and then I see it all the time with women, is despite our own shortcomings and despite the complexities of our lives, there's nobody that he won't pursue. And
Mm-hmm.
there's nobody that he won't say, if you surrender everything to me, if you come to me with your questions and your brokenness and your decisions and your shortcomings, all of it,
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing that the blood of Jesus can't cover. There's nothing that is so heavy and despicable to God that he can't forgive. Kristel, we have seen it all. We have
Mm-hmm.
literally seen and heard every story, it feels like, that a woman has endured or faced, and the shame that comes with that. And there's not even a single person who hasn't cried out to God asking for rescue that he has let down.
Mm-hmm.
He is so faithful to
Mm-hmm.
us if we can come to the place of just, Lord, intervene. And I just see that in Hagar. I see that. I love that her story is right here in the first book of the Bible, so
Mm-hmm.
that a woman today who is wrestling with those same questions and thoughts about whether or not God cares for her can see her own self and identify with her right there in Genesis, and have that same experience of crying out to God and saying, you are the God who sees me.
Yeah.
It's a
Amen.
gift. It's a gift. Yeah.
Yes. Well, Simone, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I am really excited that people are going to get to hear from you and learn more about Hagar and just see, hopefully through a different lens, not just
Mm.
Hagar, but all women, and the dignity that is already theirs because of God, and the fact that God welcomes all women and men. But in this case, we're talking about women, and that we can also do that we can also be compassionate and view people the way that God sees them, and welcome them in that way. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, friend.
All right.
Always.
Thanks for listening to the Wilderness Way podcast with me, Kristel Acevedo. If this episode encouraged you, share it with someone who might need it too. And if you have a moment, leaving a review helps others find the show and join us on the journey. This podcast is a companion to my Bible study, A Way in the Wilderness, Meeting God in the Desolate Places of Scripture, available right now wherever books are sold, including the Spanish edition, Un Camino en el Desierto, Encontrándonos con Dios en los lugares desolados de las Escrituras. You can learn more about the study and future projects at kristelacevedo.com. Until next time, walk with grace and grit.